Today, we want to take the next big step and talk about going the distance, creating a legacy. And I thought no better people to ask to have this conversation with than a married couple that's been married for 42 years with 6 kids, and they are my in-laws. And my wife and I have been very blessed and privileged to have both our parents involved in our lives. And I thought it would be great to have a conversation because from the beginning we wanted to do this series in a way that is practical and relevant and that it's flesh and blood. It's not some philosophical idea, but that it's real. That it is possible to embrace God's normal and to run with it. And I want to start the conversation there, because a lot of times people see kind of like where the product is now 42 years later, but it's important to talk about the beginning because just like with my parents, it wasn't always the best of situations, but God came in and began to change things and mold stuff. And so I wanted to start there, which, by the way, when my wife was talking about headquarters, this is the headquarters right here. Okay. So why don't we go from the beginning, right, and talk to us about your family dynamic before coming into your relationship and what was happening at that time.
Okay, so first let me say that Marco is the one that designated us headquarters. So one of the things that I think of is, I was born and raised here, and my parents separated when I was about 12. That was difficult. We were a family of 4, and it brought a lot of changes that we had to navigate through, and it was kind of difficult. We had to move. My mother had to go to work. We had to become more independent and helping out. But we came from community, just like in the church family. We had a big sense of community. Like, back in the day, it was like, if you did something wrong, that news got home before you did. So you got it there and when you got home.
It was more than just a timeout back then, right?
There was no such thing as a timeout. There was no such thing. And so we came from, it was like, Cheers, everybody knows your name kind of place. And even though my parents separated after it got past that uncomfortable stage with them, we continued to have that love and support from both of them. That was, yeah.
My situation is pretty similar to my wife's. I come from a family of 5. I'm the oldest. My parents separated when I was young. I don't even really remember a time when I had the traditional family, see my dad every day, up, going to work, that type of thing. But I always felt love. My mother never denigrated my dad. My dad always gave praise to my mother. And so they had a good friendship. And my mother always loved my father's sisters. And if you know the Barretts, we're a big family. And so there's a lot of love there.
Yep.
And so that love blunted a lot of some of the things that you felt inside as a young person. A lot of things about my dad, it really, to be honest with you, I didn't think about. It affected me more when I got older. And I began to see my friends and the relationships that they had with their dads, and their dads were always there, and the dads went to everything. And so I missed out on that, but never felt like I wasn't loved. My dad, he was a good provider. On the other hand, after that, my mom was in another relationship, which I witnessed some serious abuse from her towards my mom. And I say that, as we said earlier, only to relate it to pertaining to what we're talking about today, is that through that whole situation, if my mother was here explaining it to you, this would be a part of her testimony. Because through that all, my mother got saved. She's a strong Christian, loves the Lord. And so as it pertains to me, as I looked at it, I determined in my mind, one, that I would never put my hands on my wife. And that I would never let my kids see any abuse like that. And so that's how it affected me, especially in relationship to what we're talking about here.
Yeah. And Mrs. Barrett, when did you fall in love with this handsome man?
Okay, I feel like I'm in church, so I can't lie. And I don't advocate this to any teens that are here and listening, but I was about 16. It actually was kind of funny because we were in the same group of friends and got saved. When I was 16, he was 17. And so they said, the group that we were in and said that we had to come apart from the world and have Christian friends. And of course, Christian friends means you have a Christian boyfriend. So I only knew like 4 of them at the time. And,
So that worked in his favor, like,
yeah. And
My
so,
odds went up dramatically.
so maybe out of the 4, the 3 were already taken. And so.
oh, so he was,
That's not good. That is not good.
No.
I was left over.
No. This gets better. So he had moved. His family had moved down to Carver for about 4 years, and I was in New Bedford plotting. He was packing up to come back to New Bedford after high school, and I had a plan in my mind. When he gets here, but it really was like that. But you'll hear the deeper part. It goes deeper and better later.
Oh man, that's so good.
wait, but what about you? Was it love at first sight?
No, I guess not. Say something nice.
It was a little rocky at first. It was a little rocky. I mean, I had some issues I had to get through. But I always knew that she was the one I wanted to be with. Like I said, I had to go through my own issues to kind of get to that point. But an interesting thing that we had talked about earlier is that when I was in Bible school, I began to pray about our relationship. And so unbeknownst to me, the prayer that I was praying at the time, and I didn't know this, but it was the exact same prayer that she was praying. And now I'm in Newport, she's in New Bedford. But I thought, you know what, Kippy, if you can't make it with such a nice person like this, you can't make it with anybody. So I began to pray for God to put me in her heart. And again, we didn't know anything, but she was praying the exact same thing, and so.
And I just want to say this, this was on an off time, because we were either on hot or off cold. And so this was during an off cold time that this was happening.
Said I had issues. I didn't lie about that.
So just to give it some context, so you had said that when you were 17, she was 16, you were both radically saved. And when you got married, how old were you when you guys got married? Yes. Mom.
Okay, I was almost 20. I was almost 20.
Okay, so this is about 3-ish, about 3 years later. So when you guys got married, were you still walking with the Lord, or what was that like at that time?
We weren't really walking with God at that time. even though I got saved, I went into a backslidden condition. And like I said earlier, the backsliding is just what it means. It's sliding backwards, you know. And so it's very rare that a person who is truly walking with God, you know, suddenly falls off the cliff. It's a gradual sliding backwards. And usually it comes from the root of it, all of it, is when you begin to neglect those spiritual disciplines that you should be exercising every day. My Bible reading and devotions began to slip. My church attendance began to slip. I'll go today, this week. I won't go next week. You know, that whole thing. And then you become isolated from your church family, which is just where the enemy wants us. He wants us isolated. And like I said earlier to Marco, Pastor Shaver used to always tell us that the banana off the bunch gets peeled. So, and that's what happens, you know. So when you lose that connection with your church family, it's inevitable that you're going to start going down. You're going to start drifting further and further away from God. And so kind of that's where we were going into marriage.
So what shifted your marriage for the better?
I am going to say when my husband was in Newport Bible School, he was with a friend, and he began holding crusades at International Church. And my husband started going there. I went there, but it was just, you know, because he was there. It was like it hadn't, the spiritual part of it didn't really get root. And so he started going first. And then I always associate a big turning point. So God had been working on him, and I still wasn't going back to church yet. But I always associate that turning point was when his paternal grandmother died in September. And I felt like, I don't know if that just floored us, if it, you know, but like I said, God had been working on him, and I don't know if that was like the pivot of it all. And then shortly after that, we started going back to church. And that was a big shift because of the church community. It's so important. It was so important. It was just being with, we were all young families, and there was a lot. It was a big range in age like here. And so if it wasn't a young family, there were older adults that we were looking to. Because I always feel like every generation is looking at the generation in front of them to copy and see what they're doing. Right. And so that was a big part of our church life, and the shift is being part of a church, Bible studies, prayer meetings. And those friendships that we formed, we still have today. 40-something years later, we still have those today. Now we're sitting back watching our children have those relationships with people they started out with. And and like we're sitting back watching them get married, having children, and it's almost like watching ourselves all over again. And it's so, so important. I don't know if I can ever stress the importance of that community, because we still have that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The real shift for me began when she mentioned the Crusades. And I remember, because it was Pastor Gomes, and he was having the revivals at the International Church. And I wasn't walking right, but he was my friend. I felt like I kind of had to show up and see him. But I didn't have any intention at that time of getting my life right. So I went to the Crusades. And I remember standing in there, standing up during the altar call, and I had on my black leather jacket, and I was sweating like crazy, and I was just holding on to the pew in front of me. Man, I didn't want to go forward. But man, God just broke it down, and I went forward and recommitted my life. And then things began to change because now my devotions became regular. My church attendance became regular, prayer meeting, and you're united back with your church community. And so that was the real big shift.
Definitely.
Talked about raising kids, and 6 of them, all girls.
All girls.
That's why this man is a saint. What goes into raising a big family?
A BJ's membership. Buying in bulk.
Too real.
I said this before, sacrifice, but it didn't feel like sacrifice because of the love that you have for your family, that you'll just do anything and everything it takes to make it work, for things to go smooth. I also thought of the fireman's motto, stop, drop, and roll, because you need to do that. You're going out the door, the baby poops, somebody got a hold of milk, spilled it all over them, the toilet overflowed, and just a lot of chaos happens. You have to be okay with,
With chaos.
it's okay. And it's too bad we have to get like all the way over here older to realize, don't sweat the small stuff, because over here, it really is. I mean, looking at it now, at the time it wasn't. I was frazzled, we're late for church, or whatever. Somebody has to be somewhere, you can't go, you gotta go bring, it's just all the chaos of that. But it really is small stuff. I wish I knew that then.
Yeah.
And one of the examples that my wife talks about in terms of sacrifice is when we got married, one of the things that we decided raising our girls, because when they're young, they're very impressionable. And we decided that one of us was going to be home. So I was the primary breadwinner. My wife would work part-time. But that was a decision that we made together, that sacrifice, we would sacrifice the financial things, because when our girls were younger, it was more critical for us that they be with one of us. And again, we mentioned, listen, and we understand not everybody can do that. The way, especially today, I mean, you need almost 2 people working full time.
You need to.
And so, but we just didn't want to entrust that responsibility of our young ones to anyone else. Now, we knew that would put a strain financially on us. But I'll tell you.
Go ahead, it's all right. Go ahead.
When I see my daughters now, and they're all serving God, it was more than worth it.
Yeah, okay.
And I think that also being a product of this environment and growing up in it, and now on the other side, as a wife and as a mom, now understanding even more so that the sacrifice they made, where they were kind of like ships passing in the night, one was going and the other was coming, and what that meant. And they had mentioned they had to make those financial decisions. But I mean, all of my sisters, we didn't go to Disney, we didn't do some of these things, but my goodness, we had the best childhood. Like, my parents, and it wasn't because of the things that they did or the material things that they provided, it was the home that they created. And walking into our home, and the little things, I remember coming home from school on a rainy day and walking home, and my mom was making brownies. These tiny little things that she probably got for 50 cents, Not a big deal, but those are the things that I remember as a child. So it's just so cool to see how things kind of come full circle. And the things that they felt were a sacrifice to us, we didn't realize was a sacrifice, and we thought we have the best childhood ever anywhere because of what they created in our home. So,
And I was reading something about from Dr. Dobson, and this is something that my wife and I had incorporated in our life, is that say yes as much as possible when you're raising your kids. And I'm not saying yes to those things that we know are going to be harmful, but for example, things like DCLA or any kind of, especially spiritual things, try to say yes as much as possible, because there's going to be them times where you're definitely going to have to say no. But if they see, when you have to say no, if they see on balance that there's a lot more yeses, and I haven't been so restrained and constricted in my life, it's easier to accept the no's. They might not like it, but it's easier to accept.
That's good. It's good. I like that.
so after 42 years of marriage, how do you guys keep your marriage fresh?
The key, obvious, is trying to find time to spend together, which seems to be a little bit easier now that the girls are all bigger. We were kind of guilty of doing that, you know, when they were smaller. But it's important. But yeah, we were guilty of that, but yet we still tried to find some time to, you know, and it wasn't anything, could be going for a walk, go to the movies, go grab a pizza. One of our favorite Friday night activities was when the kids were small, we put them to bed, we went and got a pizza and watched Dallas. So that was fun for us. That was, you know, and now I think of keeping it fresh is reminding yourself of that first attraction. I think that keeps it fresh and reminds you, like, what was it that attracted me to him first, made me fall in love, you know? And I think another thing is keeping communication open, like all the time. Like, of course, you know, I could go like all day long, but, you know, just talking when things are bothering you. You might not say every little thing, but sometimes I do. But, you know, just keeping that communication open, that's so vital. And I want to say that, you know, just because we're not Exhibit A, it's just that we've been married 42 years, we might have a few more pages to our story, but we're still in it. We're still writing the story. We're still making mistakes, trying to, you know, just saying I'm sorry when something goes wrong, and we're still in it. We're still in it. We haven't arrived, and we never will.
Yeah.
We never will.
And I think another key ingredient to keeping a marriage fresh is you have to find a way to laugh. You have to have fun. You know, in interviews that know my wife, know that she just doesn't like get up in the morning and say, oh, today I think I want to be funny. Like, humor, like, seeks her out. You know, it's like, where is Joyce? You know?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's not making fun of anybody. She's usually laughing at herself because she just finds herself in these situations. Yeah. You know, and she has us all cracking up. I mean, if one of my favorite moments is when we're all together, is when I stand back and and they might not think that I'm listening, but I'm listening to everything. And I watch them around the table, just like we're doing here.
Right.
And this is how Pastor Marco wanted it. And I watch them, and I listen to the stories, and I listen to the interactions between the girls and between Joyce, and they're laughing and they're joking about this. And I say, man, that's the greatest time. That's the best moments.
Yeah.
You know, and I just soak that all in. I love it. And but you have to find a way to laugh. You can't go around your house and having your kids feel like they're in a straitjacket, So laughter is it's good medicine.
I can testify to that. She's hilarious. She's really funny. I don't know why she's being so uptight today, but she's really, really funny. One of my favorite things about going over is that I know three things are gonna happen. We're gonna talk sports.
Yes, for sure.
For sure. We're gonna laugh.
Yeah.
You guys are gonna bust out a musical as a family. Everybody sings. And then we'll talk about Jesus. Those things always happen. And we'll eat. We always eat, which is awesome. So, what about just speaking from your perspective, right? From a female perspective, a male perspective, what would you say to the male or the female? What kind of advice would you have specifically for that you are a man and being a woman?
I think for males, we really need to learn how to nurture communication. Some of us as men, I guess the best way to do it is when you watch women converse, it's like bam, 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 back and forth. I mean, everything's flowing, man. It's just like they're going at it, And you get a bunch of men together. Hey, what's up? Yeah. And so, I mean, we have to learn, and that's, sometimes it's almost a learned behavior, learning how to communicate. And when it comes to, your husband or your wife, I say we have to be careful with delivering you messages. And what I mean by that is when there's an issue, it can't be, oh, you did, you said. No, it has to be, I feel like I took it this, so because when you use you messages, immediately you put your partner on defensive. Right. And then it becomes an issue where I'm going to make my point, and you're going to make your point, and it becomes a battle. Yeah. But when you give I messages, you open up that conversation to how you feel, and it fosters more communication. You messages just shut it right down. Yeah. Makes you dig your heels in, and win your point, win your argument, and that's not communication at all. And another thing I think that I failed to mention before. You have to savor the moment. Savor those moments with your kids. And my wife and I have talked about this night, and sometimes I feel so bad when I hear them conversing and they say, Dad, you remember this? You remember when this happened? And I don't. And I don't remember. Because I used to have the mentality like, listen, tomorrow's done. I'm in this moment, and there's nothing I can do about. I mean, yesterday's done, and I'm in this moment, nothing I can do about tomorrow, and you move on. But you have to stop and savor those moments with your kids, because they will come back. They will come back on you, because they will talk about them, and when they say, Dad, you remember that? Yeah, I remember that. Because it really made you happy. And so savor those moments that you spend. Be sensitive to them and savor them.
That's good.
He's so deep. I'm like shallow. I'm like right here. I think I think the first thing I think about is, and Reverend Shaver used to say this all the time, your first attraction, obviously, to your mate is the physical, okay? We're all, Christian or not, we all got them hormones flying through us.
Hello, somebody, hello.
And, but I think it was said, too, that, that's so you're attracted physically, but someday that might change. Getting older, health reasons, whatever. So make sure you know the person and you love that person on the inside, the real person. because that's what, if the physical goes, then what? We're going to throw in the child and say, okay, I'm all done, No. Fall in love with that person on the inside, because that's who the real person is. So that's not specifically to women, but that was what came to mind. Yeah.
And just to dovetail that for 1 second, my wife said something to me one time, and I didn't really think about it in these terms. And when she said it, I said, "Man, that makes sense." She said, "I don't only love you, but I like you." And that's a you have to like that person that you're with. You have to like being around them. You have to like spending that time with them. You have to like doing things together. So you have to not just love that person, but you still have to like that person.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, I think it's cool to hear the journey, because we live in a microwave society where everything needs to happen overnight, or if not, we're done with it. And I think this is one of the critical things that I wanted to see us talk about, is the fact that it's a journey. It's a work in progress. Like you said, we may have more pages on our story, but it's still being written. And from the beginning, God always said to us that the goal of this church is to start new normals for people, where both of our families are broken, but God comes in and begins to heal and restore. And this is why it's so critical. We always talk about whoever you're going to do life with, make sure you guys are on the same page spiritually. Because you may be pushing this way, but if the other person's pushing the other way, you're never going to get it right. There's always going to be something missing, And I think it's so critical that we understand that it's not just about feelings, it's about principles, right? We've got to have the right principles in place, that if we're going to see the will of God. Because it's not just about us, it's about the next generation. And part of what God does with us is He starts a new trend, and He breaks generational curses. He breaks divorce off of us. He breaks addiction off of us. He breaks, any type of abuse off of us, and then He launches us into a new thing that it doesn't even stop with this. It carries on with our children, And so I want to end by reading this verse to us today, because here's the thing: all of us has to start somewhere. And for some of you, you're the first generation that God's like, I'm getting a hold of you to start a new thing, And that's the beauty of this, that we're a work in progress. That you may not be there yet, but you're on your way. And that's the will of God for us. It's not just tomorrow. God is thinking eternal. God's like, I want to bless you now and forever. And I want your kids to be blessed. And if Jesus doesn't come back, your kids' kids also will be blessed. And that's the legacy that we want to leave behind. And so I want to thank you guys for being, a living example of that it is doable in a society where we're seeing more. It seems like the negative always gets highlighted more than the positive, But right here in New Bedford, there's good things happening, and we got to embrace the positive things. So thank you for being willing to share your stories, and I pray that it encourages all of us and inspires all of us to say, God, do the new normal in my life and in my family and in my kids and their kids, and that when it's all said and done, we can say, man, look what the Lord has done. Amen. So can we thank God for the Barretts today?